Juliana Redding's story is one that has never fully faded from public memory. Even years later, it continues to trouble those who followed the case closely, largely because true closure has always seemed just out of reach. Like countless young dreamers, Juliana moved to Los Angeles hoping to build a future in the entertainment industry. Some who make that leap eventually succeed, others quietly return home, and some remain stuck in pursuit of a dream that never quite materializes. Juliana's journey would end in a far darker way, raising lasting questions about justice, accountability, and whether the truth was ever fully confronted. Juliana Redding was just 21 years old when she left Arizona for Southern California. She grew up in Tucson, where she attended South Point Catholic High School and was described by those who knew her as warm, ambitious, and close to her family. After graduating, she told her parents, Patricia and Greg, that she hoped to one day open her own boutique and eventually run a business of her own. Modeling and acting were part of that larger dream, not the end goal themselves. Despite moving to California, Juliana stayed deeply connected to her family. She spoke with her parents often, sharing plans, frustrations, and everyday details of her life. Text messages and phone calls were frequent, and she made trips back to Tucson whenever she could. By 2008, Juliana was enrolled at Santa Monica College and living alone in a small bungalow in Santa Monica. To support herself while pursuing modeling and acting opportunities, she worked as a waitress. By most appearances, her life seemed stable and full of promise. That sense of normalcy collapsed in mid-March. On March 15th, Juliana spent part of the day playing golf before returning home to her bungalow. That evening, she stayed in, watching television, including reruns of Seinfeld. Nothing about the day appeared unusual. The following day, March 16th, her mother, Patricia, began to worry when she couldn't reach her. Calls went unanswered, and Juliana didn't return messages. At first, Patricia assumed her daughter was simply busy. Later that afternoon, concern escalated when Juliana's neighbors contacted Patricia. They explained they hadn't seen Juliana all day. Her dog was still inside the bungalow, but the house was quiet and unresponsive. As the hours passed with no word from her daughter, Patricia felt an overwhelming sense that something was wrong. By early evening, she contacted police and requested a welfare check. Officers arrived at the bungalow and initially noticed nothing alarming from the outside. Juliana's car was parked in the driveway, suggesting she should have been home. But once inside, investigators immediately sensed danger. A strong smell of natural gas filled the air. Near the entrance, a candle was burning. Officers soon realized the stove had been intentionally turned on without being lit, creating a potentially deadly situation. As they continued searching the home, they made a discovery that confirmed everyone's worst fears. Juliana was found in the bedroom at the back of the bungalow. She was already deceased. Investigators quickly determined she had been strangled. The scene showed clear signs of a violent struggle, indicating she fought desperately for her life. Later, analysis would reveal that Juliana's own DNA was found beneath her fingernails, evidence that she had tried to pull her attacker's hands away from her throat in her final moments. Investigators quickly realized that Juliana's killer had attempted to destroy the crime scene. The stove had been left on deliberately, filling the bungalow with gas, while the candle placed nearby appeared intended to ignite it. Had the plan succeeded, the resulting explosion could have erased critical evidence and possibly destroyed the home entirely. Only the bungalow's older construction prevented the gas from reaching an explosive concentration. With the immediate danger neutralized, detectives began reconstructing Juliana's final hours. Based on evidence inside the home, they concluded that the attack occurred late on the night of March 15th, likely around 10 p.m. Someone had entered the bungalow and confronted Juliana inside. During the struggle, her head was slammed against the floor, causing a severe injury. Despite her resistance, the attacker eventually overpowered her, ending her life by manual strangulation. Phone records added a heartbreaking detail. Juliana had attempted to dial 911 during the attack, but the call was disconnected before it could connect. Investigators believed she had tried to reach help while fighting for her life. Neighbors later told police that they recalled hearing raised voices and what sounded like furniture being moved around 9:53 p.m., the night before Juliana was found. At the time, they hadn't thought much of it. Nothing seemed unusual enough to warrant calling authorities, and it could have easily been dismissed as an argument or gathering. Inside the bungalow, detectives collected extensive forensic evidence. DNA samples were recovered from Juliana's clothing, her neck, her phone, the front door, and several surfaces throughout the home. While lab analysis would take time, investigators immediately began interviewing people close to Juliana, hoping to identify anyone who might have had a motive to harm her. Juliana's father, Greg, suggested police speak with John Gilmore, a man Juliana had been involved with in an on-and-off relationship. Greg admitted he had long been uneasy about Gilmore, describing him as volatile and prone to anger. His concerns were reinforced when investigators learned that Gilmore had previously damaged Juliana's car during an argument and had once forced his way into her home. Police quickly located Gilmore and brought him in for questioning. He admitted that he had gone to Juliana's bungalow on Sunday morning, the day her body was discovered. He claimed that although her car was in the driveway, she never answered the door. Gilmore said he looked through the security gate and noticed a candle burning inside, but denied smelling gas. He also acknowledged that his relationship with Juliana had been turbulent. According to Gilmore, the two argued frequently. One argument had occurred the Saturday night before Juliana's death. Gilmore told investigators that he had called Juliana to say he planned to spend the evening with friends. She reportedly became upset and ended the call. Later, she went out with one of her own friends while Gilmore attended a house party several miles away. Text messages between them continued through the evening, though the tone was tense. Around 10 p.m., Juliana stopped responding. Gilmore claimed he tried calling and texting the following morning but received no reply, prompting him to stop by her bungalow before eventually leaving. At first, Gilmore appeared to be the most obvious suspect, but that suspicion would not last long. Surveillance footage soon showed him at a Jack-in-the-Box and a nearby convenience store between 9:45 and 10:15 p.m. Multiple partygoers also confirmed he had been present during the time investigators believed the attack occurred. Forensic results delivered the final blow to the theory. The majority of DNA recovered from the bungalow belonged to a woman, not a man. Gilmore was officially ruled out, and investigators were left facing a far more complex and unsettling mystery. With Gilmore eliminated as a suspect, detectives shifted their focus to the unfamiliar female DNA found throughout Juliana's bungalow. Investigators began examining Juliana's personal life more closely, interviewing friends, classmates, co-workers, and anyone who might have crossed paths with her in the months leading up to her death. They explored rumors of jealousy, rivalry, or unresolved conflict, including the possibility that someone harbored resentment toward her appearance, independence, or lifestyle. Every woman interviewed voluntarily provided DNA samples. None matched the genetic material recovered from the crime scene. As leads dried up, investigators uncovered another relationship that raised new concerns. This time, it involved a wealthy physician named Munir. Juliana had met him in 2007 while working at a restaurant. According to witnesses, she made a strong impression on him almost immediately. Before long, Munir offered her a job as his medical assistant, an opportunity that promised better pay than restaurant work and a chance to improve her financial stability. Juliana accepted. What began as a professional arrangement soon became personal. Munir invited Juliana to live with him in his Beverly Hills home, covering her expenses and surrounding her with luxury. For a time, the lifestyle appeared exciting, but gradually, Juliana grew uneasy. Friends later said Munir's behavior became increasingly controlling, and Juliana felt pressured by his expectations. Munir eventually proposed marriage and reportedly promised Juliana a high-end car for her 21st birthday. While the gesture may have seemed generous, Juliana interpreted it differently. She confided to others that his behavior felt obsessive rather than affectionate. She also learned that Munir had a pattern of showering women with expensive gifts, raising doubts about his sincerity. Ultimately, Juliana decided to end the relationship. She moved out of Munir's home and into the Santa Monica bungalow, which her father helped finance, determined to regain her independence and start over. Despite the breakup, the two remained in occasional contact, a detail that would later trouble investigators. One of Juliana's friends later revealed that she, Juliana, and Munir had once traveled together to Las Vegas for a birthday celebration. At the time, the trip seemed harmless, but further investigation would cast their relationship in a far more disturbing light. While looking into Munir's background, Juliana's father discovered information he found deeply alarming. Munir was married and had 3 children living overseas in Lebanon. There was no indication that his family knew about Juliana or the other women he had been involved with. When Greg confronted his daughter with this information, Juliana was devastated. She told her father she wanted nothing more to do with Munir and intended to cut him out of her life completely. Despite this, Greg himself remained in contact with Munir for professional reasons. The two had been involved in a business venture related to pharmaceutical interests. Over time, Greg became suspicious of Munir's practices, believing they may have crossed into illegal territory. Eventually, the business relationship collapsed. Investigators would later note a troubling coincidence. Juliana was killed just 1 week after that business deal fell apart. Although Munir's DNA was not found in the bungalow, and he was not in the country when police began asking questions, detectives couldn't ignore the timing. By then, Munir had already left the United States. As investigators dug deeper into his history, they began to suspect that the woman whose DNA had been found at the scene might somehow be connected to him. What they uncovered next would finally break the case open. Investigators began examining Munir's past more closely, focusing on the women who had worked with him or been involved in his business dealings. Several former associates described unsettling behavior, suggesting a pattern of manipulation and control. While no direct evidence tied Munir to Juliana's death, detectives suspected that the unidentified female DNA found throughout the bungalow might belong to someone within his orbit. Their attention eventually turned to a 47-year-old woman named Kelly Supp. Records showed that over an 18-month period, Munir had transferred more than $1 million to her through a series of large payments. Supp had previously worked in real estate and was involved in several of Munir's ventures. Though there was no immediate proof linking her to the crime, investigators believed she warranted closer scrutiny. To avoid alerting her, police placed Supp under discreet surveillance. Their goal was to obtain a DNA sample without her knowledge. After weeks of patience, they recovered a discarded cigarette she had thrown away. The item was sent to the lab for analysis. The results were decisive. The DNA matched the samples collected from Juliana's bungalow. Supp's genetic material was found on multiple surfaces inside the home, confirming she had been present during the attack. With that confirmation, investigators believed Munir's involvement was no longer a distant theory, but part of a larger, coordinated act. Supp was arrested and charged with Juliana Reading's murder. Around the same time, Munir vanished. Authorities believed he fled the country shortly after learning of Supp's arrest, likely returning to Lebanon. With no extradition treaty in place, police had no immediate way to compel his return. Still, one major question remained unanswered. Why Juliana? Investigators theorized that Munir may have ordered Supp to confront Juliana as an act of retaliation. The motive could have stemmed from Juliana ending their relationship, the collapse of his business deal with her father, or both. One theory suggested Supp was sent to intimidate Juliana, possibly to pressure Greg into reviving the failed business arrangement. But detectives believed the encounter escalated when Juliana resisted, resulting in a fatal struggle. During court proceedings, prosecutors alleged that Munir had promised Sup a six-figure payment to carry out the plan. That claim gained credibility when reports revealed Sup had a reputation for intimidating people who caused Munir problems. In prior incidents, she was accused of threatening a client who failed to pay him and confronting a bank manager who canceled one of his deals. Sup pleaded not guilty to second-degree murder. Prosecutors intended to argue that she acted as Munir's enforcer and that Juliana's death was the result of a confrontation gone wrong. However, the court ruled that this theory could not be presented to the jury due to a lack of direct evidence linking Munir to the crime. As a result, the prosecution was forced to rely almost entirely on physical evidence. That evidence was substantial. Sup's DNA appeared on Juliana's clothing, the front door, the locks, her phone, and, most critically, on Juliana's throat. Investigators also found Sup's fingerprint and a drop of her blood on a dish in the kitchen sink. Prosecutors emphasized that the two women had never met and had no legitimate reason to be in the same space. They argued the evidence spoke for itself, but securing a conviction would prove far more difficult than expected. The prosecution painted Sup as a physically imposing presence. Nearly 6 feet tall, confident, and commanding, she was described as someone capable of intimidating others when instructed. Prosecutors argued that her stature and demeanor aligned with the role of an enforcer, reinforcing their belief that she had been sent to confront Juliana on Munir's behalf. According to medical examiners, Juliana had been manually strangled. The presence of Sup's DNA on her throat was presented as the most damning evidence of all. Prosecutors maintained that such a finding could not be explained away and directly tied Sup to the act that caused Juliana's death. Still, Sup's defense team was prepared for battle. They challenged every assumption, attacking the prosecution's case piece by piece. One of their primary arguments centered on the lack of eyewitnesses. No one had seen Sup enter or leave the bungalow, and no surveillance footage placed her at the scene during the critical window of time. The defense argued that this absence of direct observation created reasonable doubt. They then introduced an alternative explanation for the DNA evidence: secondary transfer. According to this theory, Sup's DNA could have been unknowingly transferred to the crime scene through an intermediary object rather than direct contact. The defense explained that DNA can move from one surface to another without a person ever being present, particularly when objects are shared or reused. To illustrate this possibility, the defense suggested that Sup's DNA may have been present on a towel or household item at Munir's Beverly Hills residence. Because Juliana had previously lived there, the real attacker could have unknowingly brought that item into the bungalow and used it to wipe surfaces after the murder, leaving Sup's DNA behind. The defense emphasized that Sup was a frequent visitor at Munir's home, increasing the likelihood of incidental DNA transfer. They argued that this scenario, while unusual, was scientifically plausible and should not be dismissed outright. As for the alleged motive, Sup's attorneys rejected the idea that she would commit murder over Munir's failed business dealings or a breakup. They claimed the large sums of money Munir had transferred to her were legitimate payments for consulting and business services, not compensation for criminal activity. The prosecution countered with a far darker narrative. They claimed Munir had once bragged about hiring a woman he referred to as a female James Bond, implying she was capable of carrying out covert and aggressive tasks. Prosecutors argued this comment aligned disturbingly well with Sup's alleged role in Juliana's death. As the trial continued, more unsettling details emerged. Phone records showed Sup had contacted Juliana's workplace prior to the murder. Investigators also placed her near the bungalow the night before the attack. Because the two women had never met, detectives believed Sup had been gathering information about Juliana's routine and movements. Adding to the complexity, both Sup and Munir were under investigation at the time for suspected health insurance fraud. Authorities believed the scheme involved deceptive medical practices and false billing, though those charges were separate from Juliana's case. By the time closing arguments concluded, the jury faced an extraordinarily complicated decision. Despite the volume of forensic evidence, doubt had been introduced, and that doubt would prove decisive. When the verdict was finally announced, it stunned nearly everyone in the courtroom. After years of delays and a trial that stretched on far longer than expected, the jury found Kelly Supp not guilty. The decision sent shockwaves through Juliana's family, friends, and those who had closely followed the case. As Supp exited the courthouse, emotions erupted. Juliana's loved ones shouted that justice had failed and insisted that Supp knew the truth about what had happened. Their anger and grief were raw, fueled by the belief that overwhelming evidence had somehow not been enough. With Supp acquitted and Munir long gone, no one was held legally responsible for Juliana Redding's death. The one individual who connected every major figure in the case was never questioned in court. Munir had disappeared shortly after Supp's arrest, and investigators believed he fled to Lebanon to avoid scrutiny. Because Lebanon does not have an extradition treaty with the United States, authorities had no legal mechanism to force his return. Juliana's family released a statement following the verdict, expressing heartbreak, frustration, and disbelief. They struggled to understand how DNA evidence placing Supp inside the bungalow, including on Juliana's throat, failed to result in a conviction. For them, the outcome felt less like an acquittal and more like abandonment by the justice system. In the years that followed, the Reading family tried to rebuild their lives while carrying unresolved grief. Juliana's mother, Patricia, found solace in painting. She began spending time in Juliana's old bedroom, using art as a way to feel close to her daughter. Painting became both an emotional release and a means of survival. Patricia later shared that some of her most meaningful work emerged during moments of deep vulnerability. Though the pain never disappeared, art gave her a way to channel it. At times, she said, it felt as though the family was still frozen in 2008, unable to fully move forward, trapped by unanswered questions and lingering injustice. Despite everything, Patricia also endured and recovered from breast cancer, an experience that further reshaped her perspective. She spoke about learning to look for light even when surrounded by darkness, a lesson forged through loss and resilience. Meanwhile, Munir remained overseas. He reunited with his family in Lebanon and continued to deny any involvement in Juliana's death. He was never formally charged or interrogated in connection with the case. Years later, in 2015, Munir was arrested in Germany on allegations of medical fraud. Authorities accused him of allowing an unqualified assistant to perform surgical procedures, resulting in permanent disfigurement for multiple patients. More than 20 individuals came forward with similar claims. For reasons that were never fully explained, Munir was released and returned to Lebanon once again, beyond the reach of U.S. law enforcement. And the story was not yet over. As investigators reviewed the fallout from the German case, another familiar name resurfaced. Kelly Supp was also implicated in the same 2015 investigation. Authorities alleged that she played a key role in a large-scale medical insurance fraud operation involving deceptive practices, unauthorized procedures, and falsified billing. The scope of the case was staggering, with estimated losses reaching into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Supp was arrested and charged with conspiracy, patient deception, and facilitating medical procedures that resulted in permanent disfigurement. Prosecutors also accused her of helping defraud insurance companies of more than $150 million. Once again, she stood at the center of a major criminal investigation. Despite the seriousness of the charges, Supp was released after posting a bond of approximately $1.5 million. Not long after, she disappeared from public view, slipping beyond the immediate reach of authorities yet again. To many observers, the pattern felt painfully familiar. For Juliana's family, these developments reopened old wounds. Each new headline served as a reminder that the people they believed were responsible for their daughter's death continued to evade lasting consequences. The sense of injustice only deepened. Over time, Juliana's case came to be described as unsolved, at least in a legal sense. No conviction was ever secured. No definitive account of her final moments was formally accepted by a court. Yet, for those closest to her, the truth felt unmistakable. The evidence, the timelines, and the behavior of those involved painted a picture they could not ignore. Juliana's parents reflected often on the warning signs they wished they had recognized sooner. Once Munir's double life was revealed, they did everything they could to protect their daughter. But by then, it was already too late. The realization that intervention came just moments behind tragedy was a burden they would carry forever. Cases like Juliana's expose the limits of the justice system. Courts rely on strict standards of proof, rules of evidence, and procedural boundaries designed to prevent wrongful convictions. But those same safeguards can also allow guilty parties to walk free when the story becomes too complex or fragmented to present cleanly. For many, Juliana Reading's death stands as a haunting example of that failure. Her story is not just about violence or loss. It is about unanswered questions, systemic gaps, and the emotional toll left behind when accountability never arrives. It is a reminder that truth and justice are not always aligned, and that sometimes the system meant to protect the innocent cannot deliver closure to those who need it most. Even years later, Juliana's name still echoes through discussions of unresolved crimes. Her case continues to provoke debate, frustration, and quiet sorrow. And as long as the questions remain unanswered, her story remains unfinished. There is no clean ending to Juliana Reading's story. No confession, no final arrest, no moment where the truth is formally acknowledged in a courtroom. What remains instead is a quiet absence, a life interrupted, and a family left to reconcile memory with uncertainty. Juliana was not a mystery in life. She was a daughter who called home often, a young woman building independence, someone with plans that stretched far beyond a single city or career. She worked, studied, dreamed, and trusted the people around her. Those simple facts are what make her death so difficult to accept. For her parents and brother, time has moved forward, but emotionally, parts of them remain anchored to the moment everything changed. Holidays, milestones, and ordinary days all carry the weight of what should have been. Grief has evolved, but it has never fully loosened its grip. Patricia continues to paint, not to escape the past, but to live alongside it. In quiet moments, she speaks of Juliana not as a victim, but as a presence, someone still felt, still remembered, still woven into the family's daily lives. Greg reflects on choices, conversations, and instincts, replaying them endlessly, knowing none of it can be undone. As years pass, Juliana's case fades from headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But unresolved cases do not disappear. They settle into the background, carried by those who refuse to forget. Her name remains etched into records, discussions, and the memories of those who followed her story closely. Munir continues to deny wrongdoing. Soup has never been held responsible. Legally, the case stands closed. Emotionally, it never will be. Some call this a failure of evidence. Others call it a failure of procedure. To Juliana's family, it is simply a failure of justice. Her story serves as a reminder that not every crime is answered, not every truth is acknowledged, and not every loss receives resolution. The justice system can determine verdicts, but it cannot always deliver peace. All that remains now is remembrance. Juliana Reading's life mattered. Her death mattered. And even without a conviction, her story endures. As a warning, a lesson, and a quiet demand that we look closer when the truth refuses to disappear. If there is any meaning to be found, it is in remembering her not for how she died, but for who she was before everything went wrong. And in that remembrance, her story continues.